So then it gets to maybe a more complicated question,
Right.
which is there a role for genetic engineering
Traits.
within, within in utero, for example?
Yeah.
Or is that just so technically challenging that it's much easier to focus on just the IVF side of things?
So certainly on the disease treatment, monogenic genetic disorder, IVF, I think that is probably the most likely application. Further down the road, there are some obstacles to solve. One, we don't really understand biology enough. So if you wanted to make your kid, 30 IQ points smarter,
nobody knows how to do that
we don't really
today.
know how to do that. And so the biology needs to catch up.
Yep.
But I do think that as society continues to develop, if the science is there and the technology is also there, I think people will opt to do that. And of course, you consider whether or not there are other...
Meaning, let's just assume, and by the way, I think this is personally, Feng, my view is, I think these problems are way harder than people think. I think these polygenic, nuanced traits like intelligence, athletic performance, resilience, happiness, all of those things, I think are infinitely more complicated than we believe, and probably just as environmental as they are genetic. So even if you give somebody the right genetic template, if they're not in the right environmental surrounding, they won't necessarily even develop the way you hope.
Absolutely.
And you might give somebody 30 more IQ points. It doesn't translate to a person being demonstrably more intelligent if they aren't in the right environment. So that's my prediction, is that stuff is way, way, way harder, and the biology is
complicated.
It's more, but it's more complicated than anybody than any lay person is thinking about.
And also another thing is, biology has a lot of compensation.
Right.
You might make some mutations that make the person smarter, but that could also increase cancer risk, right? Or impair athletic capability.
Yeah.
Or make a person live shorter. Those complicated trade-offs are things that I think people maybe don't fully appreciate.
Yeah, for me, it's I don't know. I think there's a reason I'm not an ethicist, because I tend to think about things things seem much more obvious to me sometimes, which means I'm probably not a nuanced enough thinker on these regards. But when it comes to a disease that's going to kill you with no other treatment, it seems like a no-brainer. Genetic editing and genetic engineering should absolutely be considered a part of the equation. At the other end of the spectrum, when we're talking about things that are truly superfluous, like intelligence, height, athletic performance, eye color, any sort of trait, those seem clearly like a horrible reason, not for the ethical reasons, like, well, what does that say about disparity? Forget all that. It's the reasons you just said. We have no idea how complicated the system is. If you're going to take a huge risk, there has to be a huge payoff. And the asymmetry of that strikes me as too much. And then there's the gray area. And I guess on the gray area, I do feel a bit nuanced, right? Which is, should we just get rid of LPA genes? Well, maybe, but then to your point, we have antisense oligonucleotide inhibitors that are just around the corner that effectively will get rid of Lp(a). They shut the gene off. So why would we risk trying to eradicate this from the population when we can just give you a drug that does the same thing with fewer side effects and less permanence?
Right, exactly. Or you can do it not in the germline, but just in the somatic cells. And that could also be beneficial.
And then there's yet the other area, which is, look at something like autism. Autism is a genetic disease, despite what many people will have you believe. But the heritability of autism is so high that we know it's largely a genetic disease, but very polygenic, very subject to other things. And, do we really want to get rid of it? I don't know. Maybe. I mean, certainly when you see a child that's devastated by autism, who's nonverbal, who's harming themselves, it would be a very logical thing to say. But when you start to move further from that end of the spectrum towards the end of the spectrum where people are quite functional with autism, you might say, well, I don't know, it actually comes with some benefits as well. And do we want to create a homogeneous society where everybody is the same? This to me is a bit, this to me is the crux of sophistication. Yeah. Right. Whether it be mood.
Because that diversity is important.
Yeah.
For the human race as a whole, that diversity is what will allow the human race to be resilient in the long run.